All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg, and we have Chuck Pennacchio, our great friend of Halitics from One Payer States with us. And Chuck, you sat down. I was glad. I had a picture of an empty room back there, so I'm glad you got into your seat. I wasn't quick enough to just put myself full frame. How are you today, by the way?
I'm doing well, thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you. And how are you? How are you doing, Hal?
I'm doing well, and I really appreciate your coming on the program, and thank you for your well wishes as well, Chuck. Now, I changed, yesterday I did a program on the Tuesday Medicare for All bill drop on the Hill, and it was pretty pessimistic. I have to admit, it was a kind of a Debbie Downer program, although we had a call from a great organizer. I think you're familiar with her group, and we hope to have her on again. The program, but I was pretty down on that whole Medicare for All event, the bill drop with Jayapal and the nurses. You have a more optimistic view, a more hopeful, let's use that term, view. And that's why I call today's program, This Fight Does Matter.
Yeah, every meaningful fight does matter. I mean, my approach is universal transformational justice. It's not simply healthcare justice, it's health justice, which is housing and food and climate and anti-nuclear weapons, peace, anti-imperialism. I mean, right on down the line. I mean, I'm in every one of those fights. I come at this as president of One Payer States, which is a state-based focus on getting to Medicare for All through the states, but it's absolutely worth the fight.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think where sometimes even you and I disagree, and we agree far more than we disagree, is maybe on strategy, and we're going to get into that throughout today's program. Charles, as you know, Chuck, I still call Charles, but Chuck, as you know, I do center Gaza, and you mentioned the intersectionality of these issues: peace, healthcare, economic justice. They all go together. So just very, very briefly, I just cannot let it go. We have 18 reported dead by the Israeli military in Gaza. That's how many they are reported to have killed. So not as deadly a day as we've been seeing. I guess that's something to be kind of hopeful for, but still another 18. This is the lowest estimate. I've seen estimates of 60,000 plus dead. I've seen in the hundreds of thousands, plausibly. We just don't know how many Israel's killed in the year plus. And just real quick, there's a picture of a hospital talking about healthcare. So they keep targeting those hospitals. Chuck, why do you think, I mean, it's hard to get into the mind, obviously, of people who certainly seem, at least to me and probably to you, as sociopathic, but why would you bomb a hospital if there's any military strategy whatsoever behind this attack?
Why would one do it? I mean, I wouldn't, but it rises to or sinks to a level of thinking that is beyond my ability to comprehend as a human being. But as an historian and a diplomatic historian, somebody who has studied war and peace, primarily from an American global perspective, you have individuals who come into power and they don't know how to manage that power. I mean, the aphorism, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, is probably as close an explanation as we can get to, which is to say that it's very much like an aphrodisiac. It's a drug, and it gives one with that kind of power a lack of proportionality, a lack of perspective, a lack of human empathy that is all too common in human history. That's probably the best I can do right now. And in Israel's particular case, and Benjamin Netanyahu is somebody who is running from the law. I mean, similar to Donald Trump. He doesn't want to give up power, and he is just pushing the envelope harder and harder and harder every day, similar to our president. And there's a sort of vindictiveness, vengeance, and this also messianic mentality. Somehow they're authorized by a higher force, a god, maybe, that gives them license to behave this way. That's just sort of my, historical, somewhat psychological understanding of how people act in positions of power.
One Payer States advocate, the director of that organization, founder Chuck Pennacchio. I'm sure I got your title wrong, but we put the website there, onepayerstates.org, and the focus, again, single payer healthcare, but looking to try to kind of use the states as the laboratory of democracy, with a recognition that while a federal law would be best, and you certainly support that, you want to have a belt and suspenders approach, right, Chuck? So with the Congress in Republican hands, the presidency in Republican hands, there's other ways to try to get to the better place you're seeking.
Yeah, there's good news out across the country, and the good news is that there are a number of states that are moving toward creating a system of universal health care at the state level, approximating single payer. We should be really clear about this, because you can't get I guess what you would say, an absolute single payer system except at the national level, at the federal level. At the state level, we can come very close through enabling legislation being carried now by Representative Khanna in the House, and Senator Ed Markey in the Senate. And those bills will be coming probably in the next 6 weeks or so. And it'd be great to come back and talk about that when that's happening. But this enabling legislation would allow states to bring the federal healthcare dollars back to the states, as well as get a legal waiver to require businesses that currently self-insure to be part of the system. And that would create a level of efficiency by everybody being in the system at the state level. And that's precisely how Canada was able to get to national Medicare for all. For them, was through one province, Saskatchewan. And right now we have several states that are moving in this direction within the next 2 to 3 years: Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, New York, Maine, Colorado, Pennsylvania, others, Massachusetts. And that's really the way that change historically has occurred in this country, right? We're a federalist system. Power is divided between the states and the national. And right now, the states are where a lot of really good work is happening, not just on healthcare, but other social justice issues.
That's really exciting news.
Yeah.
In these states that you reference, including Maine, they're not necessarily Democratic trifecta states, are they? Or am I wrong? I guess Maine is now a Democratic trifecta state, meaning governor in both houses, unless they're, I guess unicameral is only Nebraska. So do you need at least a complete control by the Democrats in the state to have a shot at getting this legislation through?
Right now, yeah, it doesn't have to be a supermajority, but yeah, it does need to. That right now, the Democratic Party, at least in the states that I rattled off, is nominally on board. Not every single member, but the Democratic Party right now is the only vehicle for getting us to universal health at the state level in the states that I indicated.
Are the state Democrats in those particular states that you reference, are they significantly to the left of the national party? And I bring that up because I opened with the discussion of Gaza. And the Democratic Party nationally can't even get itself together to support and end shipping, to stop shipping weapons to Israel. They can't even get themselves to do that. So I don't see there's really much likelihood that they're going to join together to pass any kind of universal or one-payer healthcare bill in Congress. But that doesn't mean that your state Democrats are equally, I don't know what the right word is, corporatist, conservative. Help us understand that.
It depends on the state. But no state is as flooded with corporate dollars, especially medical industry dollars, as is the U.S. Congress. There's no doubt. And I know we'll be talking about the reintroduction of the Medicare for All Act, the Medicare for All Act of 2025, Pramila Jayapal in the House, Bernie Sanders in the Senate, and we got to a record high number in the Senate. That surprised a lot of people. We're up to 16, and over in the House, we're currently at 106. There was concern that we weren't going to get to 100, just given the circumstances. But the role of money in politics in Washington, D.C. has unfortunately, an outsized influence, both in terms of domestic policy and, as you referenced, foreign policy with Israel and Gaza in particular. It's really much more problematic in D.C. But I will say that the enabling legislation that I referenced, Ro Khanna and Ed Markey's state-based Universal Health Care Act, does have some attraction to some Republicans. And I've been having these conversations over the last more now than a year and a half since I moved to D.C., that the idea that states should be, as you referenced, the incubators of change, is really quite attractive to a lot of more conservative folks. And it does speak to our history. And it also speaks to the success of Canada, which is that if you model success at the state level, it then becomes irrefutable. It then creates its own kind of momentum. But the idea of getting waiver legislation that's revenue neutral, that's really important. It's revenue neutral. It doesn't require any new tax dollars to pass this legislation, simply to give the states the capacity to bring the federal healthcare dollars back to the states with guardrails. It can only be spent on healthcare. Is very attractive, actually, to a number of Republican offices and staffers that I've spoken to. So we think that there's a real chance if Mike Johnson were to bring this up for a vote.
That's great news. But I was thinking of several things as you were speaking. Just a quick follow-up on that. The Republicans who express interest, who are intrigued by this, do you get the sense that they would actually support a bill to allow, not just to allow, but that would actually enact healthcare, some type of one-payer bill on a state level? Or are they just saying, hey, we're okay with states doing it? We wouldn't do it. We wouldn't vote for it. But if you want to do it, go ahead.
So this legislation it's really important to understand that it's enabling legislation. It allows the states to create their own particular version, if you will, of universal health care. Yes, it can be single payer, Medicare for all, guaranteed universal, but it can also be, they can also model other approaches to universal health care, including things like the public option, or states can adopt hybrid systems that improve the level of participation in their states to get to a model of universal. Within 3 years, they have to get to 95% coverage if they're not already there. So there are benchmarks, but the reason that we keep it more open-ended and we're not prescriptive in saying it has to be a single-payer type of system is that we need to get the buy-in from more conservative members of Congress. I live in the world of reality, and the reality is that we have to get 218 votes in the House to pass this legislation. And in the case of a Republican president, 51 votes in the Senate, and convince the president, in this case Trump, to sign the legislation. So, the reality is that I'm one of the very few people in this work that engages with Republicans and has this conversation. And I can frame it in a way that is centered on where more conservative members are, and that includes more corporate Democrats, centering it on how this is going to help families and businesses and communities and rural hospitals, and not dive into the language that's triggering for them, which is single payer. That's triggering. That's not a positive language frame to use. Medicare for all is identified with the Democrats. It's seen as Democratic partisan. Even universal health care, which is embedded in the name of our bill, does not test extremely well. I think the best way to approach this, that's why our organization is called One Payer. Nobody is triggered by one payer when they hear it. That's kind of interesting. One payer, what does that mean? Well, we want to create an efficient one payer pool that will eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in the financing of healthcare, and allow the patient to be the center of the decision where healthcare is concerned, not some behind closed doors, insurance agent whose first job is to make money for their company. But no, we're going to put the patient first. So that's the idea here: is patient first, get the profit out of healthcare. The profitability in healthcare is what really destroys it and keeps us from getting to universal.
We got a call yesterday, I mentioned off air, from an activist, Kristen Grimm, with Mothers for Medicare for All. And
right.
She made the point that when you tell stories to your local representative, when you present the challenges that the current system inflicts on people and the advantages, especially the efficiencies that you just related, that you can make headway. But you said something that pulled me back from a moment of optimism or hope, which is that, when you talk to also corporate Democrats, my sense is that the opposition to any kind of one payer bill is actually driven more simply by, upfront corruption, just money, the money that the for-profit industry lavishes on these representatives. Actually, perhaps more, you would know better than I do, perhaps more that goes even to Democrats than Republicans, who are often true believers and don't need to be, quote, bribed, unquote, to take a pro-industry position. But if it is indeed money that is stymieing progress, then does it really matter how we frame the issue or what we call it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's not black and white. I'm going to accept the premise of your point, which is also mine, that money is an absolute corrupting factor in Washington, D.C. But an even bigger factor is the calculation as to whether members are going to be reelected or not. And if their constituents are piling on in the thousands, right, showing up right now to these town halls that are being hosted by people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and Ro Khanna and Max Frost and Chris, the senator from Connecticut,
Murphy.
Thank that there's nothing worse in the calculus of a politician to think that they're going to lose their seat. Now, it's a balancing act in their view, right? Is that, well, they don't want to piss off their contributors. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. But on the other hand, if their polling numbers on, let's just say, Medicare for all, or this legislation, state-based universal health care, is very popular with their constituents, they have to make that decision too, right? So the public opinion does matter, and people voting with their feet, showing up at town halls, showing up at their offices, demonstrating, calling in radio shows, getting on podcasts like this, writing letters to the editor. Any number of things that you can do, potentially occupying an office, as the Sunrise folks did after the 2018 election when they poured into Nancy Pelosi's office. That gets people's attention. So it's not a one issue or one factor that determines all this. Money does have outsized influence, but it's not the only thing, is what I'm saying.
So what you're saying is, to be effective, you're not saying the only way to be effective, but certainly one obvious way is to threaten the careers of these politicians, right? To put them in a position where they start to worry they may not get reelected if they don't embrace this pro-people, pro-life legislation, correct?
Right. If for folks who haven't seen it, they will be seeing it. Is it Shree Thanader, the congressperson from Michigan, the Detroit area, is being primaried. The Justice Democrats, for the first time, I think, in 2 or 3 election cycles, are actually primarying. They've been on the defensive, trying to protect the squad, right? This is the Justice Democrats. They're now supporting a challenger to a sitting Democrat who also happens to be a millionaire. Shree Thanader is his name, from the Detroit area.
He's the challenger?
No. Shree is the incumbent.
Oh, Shree. Oh, SRI, I guess.
SHRI, I want to say. Thanader, THAN.
Got it. That is one. I found him online. I was not aware of this congressman. That name was completely new to me.
Well, and he's also notable in that he is the first member of Congress to file impeachment charges against Trump, the very first member of Congress. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's doing that to get better favor with his constituents in the face now of an oncoming Democratic primary challenge from the left.
So it's a shield, right? It's a deflection move as well.
I'm not saying for certain, but I'm saying I don't know that it's more than a, it's probably more than a, well, it's more than a coincidence, right? So that he's now the first member of Congress to file impeachment charges against the president of the United States, who has, as I think we all know, routinely broken the law, defied the courts, is throwing American residents out of the country without charge, without due process, is attacking universities, independence. He's attacking, obviously, the media. He's been able to get major Democratic law firms to bend the knee and give millions of dollars in free legal aid to the president of the United States. So this is an ongoing fight, and this is also the larger context that I think we need to understand. Is that as I'm fighting on one track, right, for national Medicare for all and the state-based Universal Health Care Act, we need to understand that the Republican Party is in all but lockstep in terms of attacking the existing public health care system. They're going, I think we all know, they're going hard after Medicaid. They're radically trying to privatize Medicare, and they're hell-bent on destroying Social Security, which is what they've been trying to do since 1935 when it was signed into law. So I'm happy to talk about the Democrats, but I think we also need to understand the Republicans are in charge, and they're coming after what little we have. And I say little because we have the smallest, in terms of proportionality, we have the smallest public health system in the advanced industrial world. And yet they're coming after it. They're coming for it. And Social Security, as well as other benefits like VA benefits. And they're firing tens of thousands of federal healthcare workers. They're the ones, in fact, who are authoring and enabling the expanded powers of this president. And I see him moving as rapidly as anybody, and this is my own historical perspective, toward consolidating a dictatorship. And I think it needs to be said out loud that that's the larger context that we cannot ignore. And he's also got his eye, I think, quite seriously on wanting to grab Gaza and turn it into a real estate development project. That's just who he is. That's
resort.
Just who he
I mean,
is.
I think he was pretty upfront, right? Great beachfront property right there on the Mediterranean. We have the cruise ships come right in and dock, and sure. Trump is horrific. He is terrifying. And I don't want to minimize that at all. I guess I'll ask you this question. What can we do? I mean, I can do this podcast, and I've taken a slightly different position than you. I mean, I've taken a position that the only way to defeat Trump is by a vision by Democrats, or at this point, I don't have the optimism that the Democrats can do this, but that there needs to be an alternative to the Republican Party that presents a vision of a better America. And it's not just beating something with nothing. It's not just saying, okay, well, we'll fight a rear guard action. We're going to protect Medicaid. We're going to protect Medicare as it is now. We're going to actually build a better society, one where there is one payer care, one where housing is a human right, one where we have a peace dividend. I don't see the Democrats embracing that agenda, but is that what we need to beat Trumpism, or do you see people able to do it in other ways? And how? How do you want us to act? So there are a number of things that people can do, and I am the last person to defend the Democratic Party establishment. I think, as you know, they're not built to be an opposition party. Currently, it's a slow crawl at this point. I mean, we pointed out 6 members who are out doing these town halls and are, calling attention to the oligarchy. I wish, like Max Frost, they would call it the fascism that it actually is.
And just very briefly for your listeners, to me, that's this merger of state and corporate power. That's the cornerstone of fascism that Mussolini introduced us to in the 1920s. And you join that with this white supremacy ideology, which is what Trump is all about. And then you join that with this a religious nationalist, but in particular Christian nationalist worldview. So it's religious nationalism, it's white nationalism, and it's state corporatism. Those are the three cornerstones of fascism, and that's what this administration is aspiring to: is to create that kind of a society and system. They want to they want to kick. They want to bury people of color. They want to bury women. This is astonishing. I mean, we are looking at a neo-Confederate project. It started with the Powell Memo in 1971, and it's been updated with Project 2025. Shame on the Democrats for not being on the ball and seeing it more clearly as it's coming down the pike, which I have, and I've been warning people. And ahead of the election, no great champion of Kamala Harris, but I was knocking doors. I wanted her to get elected to keep Trump from coming back in. That's my own pragmatic politics. And I do lean into what I call radical hope, not optimism. My eyes are wide open, not wide shut. I look at the larger picture, the context of where we are. And I'm also working on building out that strategic vision that you mentioned. We have to see the future 20, a year from now, 5 years, 10, 25, 50 years out. 50 years out is our focus. And at 50 years out, we've accomplished a universal just society, justice for all. That's how I go forward with my own work. You see that vision, and then you reverse engineer, and you ask yourself, how did we get there? What did we do in terms of recruiting new leaders, in terms of communications, and yes, in terms of recapturing the Democratic Party and restoring it to its progressive 1930s roots. But it wasn't all progressive in the 1930s. There was still strong racist elements, which is the reason that we didn't get to universal health care in the 1930s. So we need an updated version. We need a more robust version. And I think that for your listeners and what people are thinking is that we need to join forces and build an outside power to, in this case, shame the Democrats in many cases into doing the right thing, piling into their offices and overwhelming the force of money that's pushing them to the right. We need to pile into their offices and shame them to push them to the left to adopt our Justice for All agenda. The Democratic Party is, unfortunately, that's the only platform or political structure that we have right now. And until we get to a third party or even move toward a parliamentary system, it's hard to see another clear mechanism for actually pushing back on and defeating the Republicans and then turning this American experiment around.
Well, you mentioned alternatives to the two parties, and that's certainly what I promote more aggressively than sounds like you do. And we've discussed this off air, so I know that's the case. But given that it certainly would appear that the Democrat Party is not prepared at this moment to embrace that progressive vision that we've discussed, doesn't that put the burden on us as organizers not to try to push the Democratic Party in a direction it seems unwilling to go, but to build an alternative? And wouldn't that alternative provide the leverage, the pressure that is necessary to perhaps turn the party around?
I wish there was a strong and vibrant, in the case of where you stand, a strong and vibrant Green Party, but it's not robust. It's just not a strong party, much as I identify as a Green Democrat. I think that would be a healthy thing. Absolutely. Any pressure to make the Democrats, in this case, do the right thing is absolutely welcome. And look, going into the rollout for the Medicare for All bill, on last Thursday at the close of business, we were at exactly 68 Democrats. And we poured into their offices on Friday and got to a number of members on Saturday and Sunday and Monday. And we grew, when I say we were very much at the center of it. One pair of states, PNHP, Healthcare Now, Labor for Single Payer, our friends at the state level. We grew that number by 36. We grew that number up to 104. And then when you add Jayapal and Dingell, the co-sponsors of the bill, or the co-prime sponsors, we got it back to 106. As I mentioned at the top, people were really nervous. They weren't even going to get to 100. But I think that shows that, okay, it's a bill that's not going to be brought up for a vote. It's an aspirational bill, for sure. It's heavily symbolic, absolutely, 100%. But it does demonstrate that when we pull together, we can move rocks and we can move mountains. And
let me just jump in, because I want to give you all credit for that. I mean, when we spoke about this over the weekend, you were concerned as well about the numbers. Apparently, you've now got more Senate sponsors than ever before. I mean, that is an absolute great accomplishment, and I give you tremendous credit for it. But you also acknowledge that there's a performative aspect to this. This is an odd year. In 24, and I found this headline from Axios after you told me that the Congressional Progressive Democratic Caucus had deprecated to a degree, and it's unclear how much, their focus on this legislation, which I, like you, believe is absolutely critical. I think it's essential if we're going to get back to some type of democratic hegemony over government, which we had from the 30s through the 60s and even into the 70s in terms of Congress, even into the 80s in terms of Congress. We're going to do that. The Democrats have to champion progressive populist legislation such as Medicare for all, one-payer bill. But when push came to shove, when they really could have had maybe some leverage over a presidential candidate, they didn't use it, and then they withdraw it as you called it, a core principle. So, I mean, where does that leave us? Let me leave it at that. Let me open the open question. Where does that leave us?
It gives now a moment. We've built street cred. We've built a stronger bridge of communication with the progressive wing, leaders in the progressive wing of the party. You know, I think finally we've got the serious attention of Pramila Jayapal. We talked about this, I think, previously. I had what seemed like a great start to a strategic conversation, and that fundamentally is the problem: is the Democratic Party does not have a strategy. Their strategy in their mind is to fundraise for the next election, the next federal election. Although there are important elections this year, New Jersey and Virginia. I mean, important gubernatorial and legislative elections. I think that's going to be fairly telling. And look, Canada just flipped from the Conservatives were on top in January. They were crushing it. They were 25 points ahead of the Liberals nationally. And they just lost an election in 3 months. They lost an election. And a big part of that, of course, was the way that Trump was behaving, including suggesting that Canada be part of the United States, that we annex Canada, as well as, Panama and Gaza and
Greenland.
Right. So things can flip pretty quickly in ways that we can't always anticipate. So again, I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful. And but we need to be prepared with a strategy to move. So to answer your question more directly, where that leaves us is in a better position to demonstrate to the Democratic Party, which is fundamentally cautious. Even a lot of the progressives are cautious. It's a party that's split between an establishment, mostly corporate wing, if you will, and a progressive wing that really, how many of them are fundamentally truly progressive in that those who self-identify as part of roughly it's 100-member progressive Congressional Progressive Caucus. I mean, to me, it's not much more than a handful that we can say we can rely on these people day in and day out. That's a really small number. And that's why I invite the Greens to run candidates. I mean, get somebody elected to Congress, and then people will start paying attention and take more seriously the Green Party. That's part of it, not just running a presidential candidate and getting, whatever 1%. That's not to denigrate what you're doing, what you're advocating for. But I think the Greens have got to win, like all progressives, need to win the lower level seats, school boards, county row offices, statewide races, as well as congressional, federal, U.S. Senate, and then ultimately presidential. It's a building process, and it's going to take years, but that involves a commitment to a strategy. And fundamentally, that's what lacking in our politics and why we're in such danger. The Republicans, on the other hand, have a strategy. It starts really fundamentally with the Powell memo, the roots of which go back to the 1950s, in which the Republican Party decided that they were going to embrace those three cornerstones of what I call fascism, right? State corporate. And a lot of the Democrats have fallen in line with that, right? The Wall Street Democrats, true. But also the white supremacists and the Christian nationalists, it's come to fruition.
Well, it's a theocracy, right? It's the theocracy, it's the military, and it's the corporatocracy, if you will.
Right. But what they did is they created an infrastructure, right? They created a media infrastructure. It's called Fox News. It's called social media. It's called Newsmax. It's called, and they created a Federalist Society, right, that has captured the courts. The Federalist Society was a design funded by the Koch brothers that recruited young law students and flew them to conferences and fed them and put them up overnight, and they cultivated the relationship with these folks. That's really intentional, and that's very strategic.
I remember when I started law school back in the late 80s at Georgetown, and there was a Federalist Society chapter there, and this was relatively early. I mean, it wasn't the very beginning, but it was relatively early. They were well funded. They had a lot of nice materials that they were sharing, visuals, trying to cajole people to join it. And I went to, I was like, I didn't know what the hell the Federalist Society is. I went over there and I was like, within 2 minutes, I was disgusted. And I kind of confronted one of the leaders, but it wasn't, what was the point? I mean, he was getting some kind of money too. He probably had some internship lined up, relatively high paying, and probably a lot more pleasant job than working in a law firm 80 hours a week and getting not as much money probably, but close to it. So yeah, they're well funded. But that brings me, which no progressive, truly progressive group could ever hope to achieve that kind of money, because the billionaire class, the nascent billionaire class at that point, recognized that a truly hard right, libertarian leaning legal group could help them get richer and tighten their stranglehold over power. But that brings me to a point. These corporatist, conservative type groups, they're willing to challenge Republicans. They're willing to go, if you're not on board their agenda, they'll go after you. I don't see that on the institutional left. The institutional left seems pretty unwilling to take on Democrats, if period, except maybe in primaries. But that's not the case with the Republicans. They'll fight. There's infighting. They'll challenge their leadership all the time. Every Democrat voted for Hakeem Jeffries to be their leader.
Right. Yeah. Again, no defender of the Democratic Party am I, but the thing, one of the major differences, though, I think we may have talked about this maybe the last time we were together, is that Hakeem Jeffries was also able to keep his caucus together to fight against that resolution, that budget resolution. And then, of course, Chuck Schumer folded on the Senate side. So I mean, you got to be kidding me that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who are both New York Wall Street Democrats, can't get on the same page. I mean, and then Chuck Schumer just went way out of his way to defend himself and just fell over himself, saying, "Oh, it would have been much worse if the government had been shut down." That's insane. I mean, this is an individual who is well beyond his ability to lead, and I think it's also he is really forgotten probably who he was when he first got involved in politics too. That's what the money does, to your point. It corrupts them. But in terms of the Democrats, again, we have to make them do it. FDR said it, make me do it, and like Bernie says, welcome the hatred of the royalists, the billionaire class, make that your moniker. The Justice Democrats did run, and their most notable victory was AOC in 2018. She took down an established Democrat. She took down one of the leaders in the party. That can and should be done. That has to be done repeatedly. But that's on us. We can't look for the Democratic Party to do it. I think that's the main difference here.
So let me interrupt you again, because I'm wondering if you see some positivity in this new Democratic Party vice chair David Hogg, who talks about primarying what he calls do-nothing senior Democratic representatives. What's your reaction to that, and as well as the vitriol he has received from party insiders and old heads like James Carville, who has no real position in the party, but has positioned himself nevertheless as some kind of a oracle?
Yeah, I mean, he's become a cartoon character, James Carville. He really is. I mean, he's the one who's just ignore Trump and the Republicans. Just ignore them and just let them do whatever. Yeah, that's exactly the way you deal with fascism. Just ignore it. Yeah, that's worse than appeasement. That's ridiculous. So yeah, Carville is a joke. I think anybody who pays attention to him knows that that's the case. But as far as the challenging the Democratic Party, David Hogg, I welcome it. Bravo. I love his energy. I love his spirit. And I'm also pretty good friends from Pennsylvania with Malcolm Kenyatta, who's the other vice chair. He's a state legislator, openly gay, black man, really articulate. So you've got Hogg and you've got Malcolm Kenyatta. And I hope they push the hell out of Ken Martin, really push him hard as the DNC chair to take a much, much more pronounced position. I think the Democratic Party platform should lead with take no corporate dollars. Stop it. Our number one commitment has got to be to overturn Citizens United. That's got to be a litmus test for the Democratic Party. You've got to stop the money, because until you do that, nothing fundamental is going to change.
So I'm going to jump in again, because I agree with you, but I would not stop taking billionaire money as the first litmus test. You know what I would make it? Support Medicare for all. You want to take money from big pharma, from Pfizer, from for-profit healthcare hospital corporations. You want to take their billions? Be our guest. As long as you're on Medicare for all, as long as you're a reliable vote for Medicare for all, I don't really care. But obviously they go together, because if you take the billionaire money from the healthcare corporations, you're not going to be for Medicare for all. Well, you choose. If you can get them to give you money, they're good billionaires according to Ken Martin, that's fine. Take it. But you've got to vote for pro-people, pro-life, pro-worker legislation. And that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, and unfortunately, that's not the way it works. I think you know that. I mean, let me give you an example of my old boss, Ron Dems, who I worked with when I was at the University of California in Berkeley, and Les Aspin. They were both elected in 1972 as anti-war. This is the Vietnam War now, right? Which marked the end of the war was yesterday. We maybe make mention of the Vietnam War and its importance to our lives. That was 50 years yesterday that the war formally ended in 1975. Is that Ron Dems and Les Aspin had the exact same positions on issues, especially foreign policy issues, ending the war in Vietnam. And if you track how their careers went, Ron Dems stuck to his principles. He was the conscience of the Congress. I've even talked to and spent a weekend with a right-wing congressman, Lamar Smith, nicest guy in the world. He'd give you the shirt off his back, from San Antonio, Texas, Lamar Smith. But he voted right-wing, during his career. But nonetheless, when Ron Dems was in the well of the House to speak, even the conservatives stopped to listen. Why? Because they knew this guy was principled. They didn't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but they knew that he was uncorrupted. I mean, that's who Shirley Chisholm was, right? Unbought and unbought and unbossed was her frame, and that's the way that she went forward. Same thing with Barbara Lee, who succeeded Ron Dems into Congress. The only vote against the Iraq War. This is something that we've got to the Afghan War, excuse me, is that Les Aspin. When he comes into Congress, he starts to take the military industrial money. And then, of course, he becomes Secretary of Defense. And Ron Dems sticks to his position and rises to the chair of the House Armed Services Committee and does what he can. But, as chair, he has to keep things in balance. But Ron was the conscience of Congress. He was the one who consistently voted against these first strike nuclear weapons, voted against American intervention in Central America and the Middle East, and you name it. So, but those were two really good examples, or two examples of what money does to one person who, when they come into Congress with good intentions, and I think a lot of members do come in with good intentions, and then suddenly they're wined and dined. They show up to the cocktail party, and people start writing checks, and they start thinking, wow, this is fun. I don't have to actually go out and raise.
And I have health care now, because AOC was so astonished when she first got into Congress, and she said, anyway, I know there's, by the way, some revisionism that says she really isn't, that doesn't really come from such a working class background and this and that. I don't know. I'm not getting into all of that. I know she made the point. She was amazed when she became a congresswoman and she actually had health care. So yeah, they start to get the quote privileges, and they don't want to give them up. And who can blame them?
Yeah, I mean, I call the town puzzle. It's the Puzzle Palace, Washington D.C. It's like the land of Oz. You start experiencing the poppy effect, right? Oh, it's like a drug. It really
well,
is.
People are nice to you, and they have good manners, and they treat you a lot better than those working class factory workers back in your hometown who bullied you and treated you, like crap. So yeah, you're like, well, wait a sec, this is a lot better than what I used to have. But there's so much to unpack with that. But I just bring up David Hogg. I think you're more of a supporter of DEI. I have some real questions about the whole DEI movement. But one of the problems we're seeing now with the Democratic embrace of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is they have a lot of rules that require the Democratic national officers to be in various identity groups and to be identified as such. So now Hogg and Kenyatta are both being challenged by this Native American woman. Her name is Free. She's saying that the party didn't abide by its rules and that there needs to be a revote. And this could mean the insiders who really can't stand Hogg have a shot at getting rid of him, or possibly she could beat out Kenyatta. So you do see that sometimes these rules can be used to promote a more regressive rather than more progressive agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's the politics of intention, and then sometimes it can kind of spin out of control. Look, I was in higher ed for 32 years before I was fired for union organizing, right? So I'm a union guy. I'm an organizer, an academic, a social justice leader. So I've worn all these hats. And I was one of three. There were about 25 people on the committee. I think 3 of us were white males on the DEI committee at my University of the Arts in Philadelphia, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And I had questions, when they were going forward with this. And I was at a university that identified my students. 60% of the population of my students identified as queer. 60%. It's an arts university.
Okay.
So I was having this conversation with my students a lot, right? And for me, growing up in a conservative Catholic household, it's still an adjustment. It's still intentional work I have to do. I show up at all of my Zoom meetings, and I'm always renaming myself he, him. And I think earlier on, a lot of people were doing that, and they've just simply stopped doing it. They've simply stopped doing it because it's not that important to my core identity that I know what other people's identity is, or I have to share my identity with other people. But the reason I do it is to be welcoming for those for whom it is important. And so that's the balancing act here, Hal, is really respecting people, younger people. And the way that I would have this conversation, and the point I reached is that identity politics is so important to younger people because we've basically taken everything else away from them. I mean,
I so agree with that view. And that's why I always take the position, what we need to do is guarantee everybody has enough and no one has too much. Part of the push, I think, so much from, the anti-racism movement, which we see is there was a lot of corruption in that movement. I don't know what's going forward now, but, is that just like you said, hey, I'm not doing well, my life isn't what it should be. it's because I'm black, rather than saying this is an unjust economic system that we have. And African Americans do have it worse on balance than whites, but so do a lot of white people. So what we need is a system that guarantees everyone, the poor whites, everybody gets enough. We make sure that wealth and income are distributed in an equitable fashion, not based on your identity, but based on your humanity.
Yeah. So this is exactly what the billionaire class wants us to do, is to fight over cultural issues, right? They want us to tear each other down over, in many cases, superficial or artificial ways of dividing us, you know. And it's not to deny that race doesn't exist, although a lot of people say it's a concept that's been weaponized. I mean, same thing with gender, non-gender, geography.
They're real, but they're also constructs that are used to keep us divided.
Absolutely, and those are core tenets of fascism. We talked about the original three, right? Social or corporate. State corporatism and white nationalism and religious nationalism, but they use all of those other tools, including misogyny, xenophobia, racism, stealing elections, lying, attacking truth, attacking science, attacking intellectuals and artists and what have you. That's what fascism does, and that's why it's so effective. And shame on the Democrats if they use that same toolbox to divide their own party. I mean, this is really bad politics, really bad politics. So is this person you mentioned, this Native American, is she coming at Hogg and Kenyatta from the left or the right?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't have an answer to that. That's not Dave Weigel, who is a former Washington Post reporter, put this in Semaphore, which is now, I think, kind of his baby. And Weigel's a really good reporter. My son used to be a reporter, and he spoke very highly of Dave Weigel. Some people felt he wasn't. He was too kind of nonpartisan. He just would report the facts. I always liked that about him personally, but I get that criticism. All I know is that Free argued that she lost, and it's on the screen. I just showed you. They violated this charter because they didn't make it clear enough to voters that she was a Native American, and also apparently, it was Hogg and Kenyatta, two men, one a man of color who happens as I think you mentioned, but he is gay, I believe,
yes.
And then
yes.
the other, I believe, straight white man, Hogg, and they're claiming that there should have been more diversity, I suppose. I understand, and this is from reading between the lines, that she is not attacking them from any partisan perspective, but she may be more centrist than Hogg. Kenyatta isn't a super lefty, is he? As far as I know, he isn't, Chuck.
His politics align very closely to Bernie Sanders. I mean, yeah, they do, but you know, and this is sort of inside baseball. When he came out and endorsed Joe Biden in the primary when Bernie was in the race, and I had a back channel conversation with Malcolm Kenyatta and said, "What's up, Malcolm? Your politics align with Bernie's," and I ultimately reached the conclusion that this was his way of climbing the food chain, and actually it's paid dividends, right? He's now vice chair of the DNC. Had he sided with Bernie Sanders then, he likely would not be vice chair of the DNC today. So I'm not, people do things for their own reasons, and I'm not even being critical of Malcolm here. I'm not, but I had an honest conversation with him, and he acknowledged, yeah, I stand with Bernie. But, the unsaid thing is that he didn't want to get on the wrong side of the Philadelphia Democratic Party establishment. That's where he's from, Philadelphia. So this is the way people do politics. And I don't, like I say to people, I don't take my politics personally. I've said this to you. I take it politically. And so I'm not going to judge. I'm going to evaluate. And I've got a memory for this. I remember that conversation I had. I remember what he did in that moment. And now, frankly, I've got a connection to somebody who's in the vice chair position at DNC. I can have a civil conversation with Malcolm. And you mentioned Alan Minsky from PDA. He had a sit down with David Hogg the other day as well. I mean, David Hogg reached out to him and said, we want to engage with PDA. So I take that as a good sign. So
I mean, that's impressive. I agree, and that's hard for me because I do take things pretty personally, or at least I react anyway. I get angry when I feel like I've made a very powerful, cogent argument and it's just completely ignored. And I often think those arguments are ignored because people are paid. Their bread is buttered on one side, and they're not going to turn it over. That may be true in some cases and not in others. And I want to give, and I want to give you this opportunity here. So you're talking about Kenyatta making a pragmatic decision to endorse Joe Biden. Many of us on the left have been very critical of AOC. I've outlined a number of ways that I feel that she is, I would use the term betrayed. I don't think it's too strong, the progressive movement, the peace movement. But I've also asked this question to myself, but I'm going to ask it to you. Are people like Kenyatta and AOC playing the long game, and can they win it? It's not just that you get on the DNC. Can you get to a position where you actually can move this country in a better direction? And if they do get there, will they, after having already bent the knee to the establishment on repeated occasions?
So I'm going to roll with the point I made earlier, which is strategy. They have a strategy, I believe, AOC and Malcolm Kenyatta, and this is their, when AOC was part of that Sunrise occupation, right, the Sunrise Movement occupation of Nancy Pelosi's office, right after the election, before she was sworn in as a member of Congress. She made a statement that was absolutely embraced by, activists on the left. It's like, yeah, now she's one of us. She's our person on the inside. But you need to be in a position of power in order to accomplish things. So I made reference earlier to Ron Dems, who I think, is somebody who is a stalwart progressive, arguably the leading voice of the progressive movement in the modern era, arguably. Within Congress, certainly. And he was able to climb the food chain. He was able to become chair of armed services and do some good things there. Not everything he would want to, but he had to hit the majority of his committee together. That's his job. So there's a pragmatic side to politics here. You can make the best argument in the world. I can make the best argument in the world. But if we don't have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people behind us, we're not going to be listened to. In most cases, right? That's the power equation that folks on the left tend to not take too seriously. But I do. I mean, we have to build a strategy. Again, we have to build that infrastructure. We have to build an ALEC on the left, right? The American Legislative Exchange Council. We have to build that entire infrastructure in order to get back to power. Making arguments and just simply calling members of Congress, and begging them to do the right thing it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. We really have got to be intentional in how we build out this strategy. It's got to be really smart, and it's got to be time tested. And for your audience and you, I think I've shared this before, is go to NV database, right? Letters NV as a nonviolent database, all one word, nvdatabase.swarthmore, as in Swarthmore College, nvdatabase.swarthmore.edu. And you will see there an archive of the best movement politics over the last century across the world. And I think we can learn so much from our four activists, organizers who have come before us. And we also have to understand that we do need leaders. You have to have leaders. It can't be all bottom up. I mean, South Africa needed a Nelson Mandela in that moment in time in order for South Africa to move from apartheid to a republic without it becoming a total, blood affair, just a complete bloody affair. So we do need to cultivate leadership. And I think that that's really one of the danger points right now is that Democrats do not have I guess what you would say, an established, maybe that's not even the right word, an identifiable leader. Although this came across the other day, and I'd be curious to know what you think. I know we're coming on the top of the hour, but Al Gore gave a speech at the San Francisco Climate Conference the other day, and I think it's the best speech that I've seen since Trump came to office. I mean, it really was a verbal punch in his face. It was a sort of a speech that I said, look, I'm not a huge Al Gore fan, but damn, if he were president in 2000, how much our lives would be different today? I believe just dramatically different. We would not have gone into the war in Afghanistan. I don't think there's any conceivable way, honestly. But
I don't think 9/11 would have happened.
Yeah, you may be right. I don't know, but he certainly would have listened to, his counterterrorism chief, Richard Clarke. Condoleezza Rice kept Richard Clarke from meeting George W. Bush. The first time they met was the night of 9/11. So the president was not even privy to all of the intel surveillance that was indicating that there's a very serious chance we're going to be hit. So yeah, to your point, I think Al Gore would have kept that counterterrorism chief as part of his cabinet, whereas in George W. Bush's case, he demoted him. And
I was a big Al Gore supporter, and people find that odd. They're like, well, you used to recognize that the Greens were the wrong answer in 2000. Why have you changed your mind? I'm saying because Al Gore was a better Democrat, was a better, in my opinion, a much better choice than either Hillary Clinton or Kamala was in 2016 and 2024. And that's because he was a white man. And okay, fine, whatever. I don't want to get it. But at some point, also right. The Democratic Party, although Clinton did take the Democratic Party, in my view, in a very bad direction, Chuck, it wasn't as bad in 2000. It's gotten steadily worse. Supreme Court decisions and the like have really, I think, taken a toll. And let's not discount Clinton's bad impact and Obama's bad impact on the party. So there's a lot of factors. By the way, that's the website you recommended. I just thought I'd show it to people, nvdatabase.swarthmore.edu. I think that's what you wanted, right, in terms of case studies and the benefits of nonviolent action.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful website. It's more than a decade worth of work by George Lakey, not to be confused with George Lakoff. George Lakey, longtime nonviolent civil disobedience leader going back to the Vietnam War era. He's just recently kind of retired and stepped back from that work. But George and his students, undergrad and graduate students, compiled this archive. It's a treasure trove. It's amazing. Really. Don't
you think that, just to get back to what we were talking about as we are running out of time, don't you think that AOC is kind of now taken over as a leader, if not the leader? She's considered the front runner among a number of potential 2028 nominees for president.
Yeah, and her close association and alignment with Bernie is all good, because I think if there's one person that the Trump voters who are now having buyer's regret, they're saying, damn, I wish I had a chance to vote for Bernie in the general back in 2016, if not 20 and 24. I mean, how different our world would be if that had occurred, right? So 20%, I think you know this, 20% of the people who voted for Bernie in the primary in 2016, 20% voted for Trump in the general. And I think similar numbers in 2020.
All right, so just to pursue this just a little further before we end, in terms of AOC, would the Democratic elites and establishment stop her, kibosh her campaign in 28? If they can they? And finally, if they can't and she is elected president, would she really do you have faith in her? Do you have trust in her really confronting the powers of because as president, she really could truly do that and moving us forcibly in a New Deal type direction?
So I'm an organizer and an historian, and when I put my historian hat on, I'm not good at predicting the future. I'm good at planning for the future. I mean, with that radical visioning, right? But there's no saying that we're going to get there. But if you don't have that aspirational view, and that's what I think AOC represents. is an aspirational view, is that, yeah, radical hope for sure. I mean, I would absolutely give her the keys to the White House yesterday if we could. 100%. Look, is she perfect? No. Is anybody perfect? No. You know, I think we shouldn't be too critical of her at this point in time either. You know, we can always find those 1, 2, 3% decisions that she makes to be critical of. And look, let's get up front here as well that Bernie and AOC both endorsed Joe Biden in April of 2023 for the presidency in 2024. Remember this? April 2023. People don't have a memory for this, but it's important to say that the two leading opposition voices right now to the fascist rising power, the oligarchs, are people who endorsed Joe Biden back in April of 2023, shut down a primary challenge to Joe Biden, and failed to take him up on his seeming pledge, which was, I'm going to be a one-term president. That didn't happen. We ended up with Kamala Harris. I would have loved to have seen a number of candidates play it out in the primary and see who emerged. I think it would have given progressives a much better chance of seeing somebody getting into the White House, but certainly a stronger candidate than Kamala Harris, I believe, as well. So, yeah, I'm all in with AOC right now, but I'm fighting here on day 101 and planning to get our state-based universal health care bill rolled out in the next 6 weeks or so. And is it largely symbolic? Hell yeah. But we have to keep aspirational. We have to fight on the offensive as well as on the defensive. And so everything that I do is intended to push back on the rising fascism, as well as to push forward on the progressive front as well. Thank you, Hal.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chuck. I was going to ask you, had anything you wanted to add, but I think you added it, so we're good. Thanks again. It's always just great for me to have somebody with Chuck's gravitas, his record on this program. Kind of keeps me in line a little bit. You know, I go off there and I'm like, oh, AOC's awful and Bernie, they're making things worse. And, you know, I really appreciate a much more kind of measured, and I think, you know, you're unlike a lot of Democrats also, and I'm not even calling you Democrat, but a lot of sort of leftists, but who are firmly in the Democratic camp. You criticize AOC, you criticize Bernie, you pointed out some of the things they did that we on the left didn't like, and I appreciate that as well. So thanks for the kind of, I think, big picture, drawn very fully and accurately. Appreciate that, Chuck, very much.
Yeah, and I appreciate you and your audience, your folks with us, and you know, radical hope for sure. You know, not optimism, hope, in my view. Optimism is an ideology. Radical hope is visioning that future, eyes wide open, not eyes wide shut. And I think that's the difference. Is that with optimism, it's eyes wide shut, which is to say that that somehow things are going to work out. Somehow that tomorrow is going to be a better day. We don't know that. But we do know is that if we're strategic, if we plan things, if we come together, if we're mindful of what's necessary to win, then our chances of winning are so much greater than just sort of giving ourselves over to this kind of almost a Pollyannish worldview. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but this is the way I encourage folks to think about the world. Is that we need to plan, and that NV database at Swarthmore is a great tool to help build out that strategy. And maybe next time I'm back, we can actually go deeper into the conversation about strategy.
Would love to do that, Chuck. I actually just muted him because we're at the end of the program. Tomorrow's the free-for-all. I'll be off Monday and then Tuesday with Arlen. Have a great rest of your day, please.